Welcome to The Way the World Works, where the trusted team behind the Tuttle Twins books tackles current events, hot topics, and fun ideas to help your family find clarity in a world full of confusion.
Hi, Katie.
Hey, Brittany.
So today it's another story time about property rights and how they helped make people more free. And today the story comes from Jim Crow South. And I talked about this a little bit a couple episodes ago, but Jim Crow is a nickname for what we give these separate but equal laws that happened after the Civil War. And what separate but equal meant was that when the federal government came in and said after the Civil War, oh my goodness, I yawned, you guys, excuse me. When they came in and they said everybody is equal, the South found a loophole to this. I shouldn't say all the South. There were many good people in the South, but the governments found ways to keep racism alive and well, legalize racism by saying, okay, they said everybody has equal access, but that doesn't mean they can't have separate equal access. So what that means is there was a drinking fountain for white people and one for black people, bathrooms for white people, bathrooms for black people. So it was all this like separation. And a lot of times the black sections or the black bathrooms weren't as well taken care of. It was a horrible time. But that happened even with laws outlawing that in place, right? It was still happening. And later it would be years until the Supreme Court would overrule that. But so in the meantime, black communities in the South especially had to, because it was only the South, the Jim Crow laws, had to find ways to try to live their lives as freely as possible. But this was hard when sometimes they'd walk into grocery stores and they'd say, we're not serving your kind here. Restaurants would be like, we don't serve black people. And so it was really hard for them to get, anything they needed to live, even, finding housing, renting housing, owning land, things like that. It was really hard. But there were some free market. I think I said property in the beginning of this episode. You have to forgive me. We just recorded a lot, but I meant free market, which is kind of goes hand in hand with property, but how the free market helped combat these Jim Crow laws. So there's a company called Sears, and I don't even know if Sears is still around because I know as of like 6 years ago, a lot of them were shutting down. But Sears was like the first real department store in America. And what is a department store? Because I don't even think there's a lot of department stores much anymore. A department store
Right.
is when you go to the mall, which again, I don't think there's very many malls anymore. But when you go into a mall, there's usually like a couple really big stores like Macy's or Dillard's or Nordstrom or these stores that are huge and they have like men's clothes, women's clothes, children's clothes, like shoe department. And then like they'll have like bedding and like kitchen appliances. Like it's all these different types of things, makeup counters, perfume counters, jewelry. It's like all the things you might want in one. It's like a mini mall in one store kind of. So back in the day they had these, and Sears was one of the first to have a catalog. You might not even know what a catalog is. I feel like sometimes when we do these shows,
I know. It's like we need an interpreter.
I have backstory for all the different things. We did an episode once and I had to talk about like a telephone connected to the wall. And I'm like, that's so foreign probably to most of our listeners. So Sears had this catalog, which is literally a magazine you send in the mail. And then you would send money in an envelope with the name of what you wanted in the envelope and hope that the money and everything got there safely and that the person would send you what you needed. So nowadays we online shop, but this was like pre-online shopping. And I remember before online shopping getting catalogs, and it was like catalogs specifically for like teenage clothing. And I thought it was so cool.
I remember that too.
Trying to like my mom, I didn't have checks, but I had a lot of babysitting cash. So my mom, I'd have to give her my cash and she'd have to either call in and place the order or like mail in a check, the whole thing. And then maybe 2 months later, I got what I wanted. So the cool thing about Sears was, I mentioned that people could go in a grocery store and be turned away for the color of their skin if they encountered somebody that didn't, that was ignorant and racist and didn't want to serve them. But Sears was different because nobody could see your face if you were mailing in something. And so Sears had this rule that they would sell to anyone as long as you had the money and they were able to like read your handwriting and they could see what you wanted. And this became amazing for Black Southerners, especially ones that lived in the rural South, like the undeveloped kind of areas of the South where, your nearest grocery store is going to be forever away, and it's probably going to be like a little general store. It's almost kind of like a convenience store, like a 7-Eleven. They didn't have a lot of things, but this became something that was known in the South as an opportunity for Black people to get the clothing and the supplies that they needed without having to worry about that. Now, the problem is in a lot of rural households, you couldn't get mail directly at your house. Like you'd have to like literally walk long distances to get it. And so eventually this changed and they were able to do, there was, what was it called? The Rural Free Delivery Act, I think, and then Sears was able to send catalogs directly to the homes of these Southerners, and it became, again, it just shot up. Like this was the thing. There was one professor who teaches a class on, a college professor, about Jim Crow, and he was talking about how this small catalog, this Sears catalog, was like this radical tool for change for racism. And that's so silly for us to think about now. It's a catalog, right? It's so outdated. And yet, because of this, people were able to get supplies that they needed. And it wasn't even just supplies. Eventually, Sears actually sells homes. I don't
Oh,
know.
and there's you can look them up and see them still today. It's such a cool that is such a cool thing.
My friend lived in one for a
Oh
very
my
long time. It
gosh.
was like our group hangout house, and yeah, it was one of those Sears houses. What's funny is Amazon makes them now too, I think. Like
Mhm.
they have
Mhm.
something similar. But you would literally send out for a house, and they were pretty cheap compared, and they would send you like all the supplies, I believe. So you were still building it, to my understanding.
Mhm.
That, but yeah, so really cool. So we talked in an earlier episode about how a lot of Black Americans couldn't get homes either because people wouldn't want to sell them or rent to them. And so if you were able to get property, you could just send off for your Sears house and you could put it together and you had a house. And I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but so Sears policy was, again, that it would accept any order it received, even if you didn't actually fill out their form, as long as they could read what was on your piece of paper saying what you wanted, the money was there, you got it. And so this was a really big opportunity for people who were able to thrive. And that's not the only one. I want to talk about one more story before we end up. And that was it comes from the world of professional wrestling. So professional wrestling is like, I don't want to call it fake or people will get mad at me. If you guys have ever seen like the WWE and there's like wrestlers dressed in like kind of costumes and they're over the top. So this has actually been a thing that's a staple of American history for a very long time, especially in the South. And there was this one wrestler who was a heel. And what a heel means in wrestling is that you're kind of like paid to be the bad guy. You're not really a bad guy, but like that's the character you play.
Yeah,
And
it's
so
like
there
The
was,
Undertaker.
it's like, yes, it's like then who is a friend of mine. So, or not the Undertaker.
Oh, Kane,
Kane.
Kane.
Yeah, his name is Kane. He's a friend of an old friend of mine. But
Yeah.
so this guy's name was Sputnik Monroe. That was his legend. That was his like his character name. He was his legendary wrestler. And back in the day, like wrestling shows would travel around to these small rural towns, and they'd like rent out like high school gymnasiums or local like little areas where they could set up a wrestling ring and people would come. And this was like the highlight for your town when wrestling was in town. Now this was during Jim Crow laws, of course, so Black people were allowed to come, but they had to sit in like the worst seats ever. I think they called them in this particular place the crow's nest because it was like up on the very top, they could barely see, and that was the rule. The thing is, Sputnik Monroe he liked whoever liked him, right? So after these shows, he would go and he would drink with the Black people, his fans, and they all became like friends, and the Black community loved him. And so every time he'd come to a town, it would sell out the entire theater. Like people were just like lined up because they wanted to see him. And so eventually the promoters, the people who like threw the shows, they they liked that they were selling more tickets, but then they realized that the people they were selling their tickets to were Black, meaning there wasn't enough room to put them in the bad seats. So they were
Mhm.
like, what do we do? Now we're selling these tickets, but these people aren't allowed to sit, up close. And so Sputnik Monroe was like, listen, I'm not going to perform. If you don't let these people sit where they should be allowed to sit, I'm quitting. I'm not going to do these shows.
Mhm.
And they were so worried because he was making so much money for them and he was creating so much value. They were so worried of saying no to him that they started integrating these local rural Southern gymnasiums and auditoriums. So here you have Jim Crow telling people, absolutely not, you can't sit with us. But then when the free market comes into play and people see that there's money being earned, and Sputnik Row can actually say, like, this is the money I'm bringing in for you. Here's the value I'm bringing to you as a performer. You're going to lose all that if you don't start integrating these seats. And that to me is such a powerful lesson, both with Sears and this story, of how the free market works, right? Because it takes a long time to change people's, I don't know how you want to say it, but like to change someone's opinion on something that's so deeply rooted in an old, even if it's hateful ideology. But what people do understand is incentives, and they understand money. And
Mhm.
so slowly, maybe it started with this money incentive, but then later on, it just becomes so natural that, yeah, why would we ever have been segregated? That it's a really cool story to me. And I love finding these little pockets in history where there's just these perfect examples of how the principles that we believe in, Katie, help the world become a better place. And I don't know, had you ever heard that story before?
I hadn't, and well, first of all, the story of Sputnik reminds me, although the premise is a little bit different, but it reminds me a little bit of the Tuttle Twins in the search for Atlas. Atlas is a strong man in the circus, and just basically threatens to leave, and they realize that he's a big draw, and they better give him what he wants because otherwise the people won't come to the circus anymore.
It kind of
But
looks like him too.
yeah, yeah, he does. But more than that, what I was thinking about was so many times um, the people that we don't think that we like, we're talking, I guess, collectivism here, right? We think that these people must be this way, or we've heard that this person is our enemy or a part of a group that's our enemy. And usually we don't know those people. And when we have an opportunity to sit next to them and cheer in the same crowd for the same person that we really love, we have the opportunity to realize that we really don't dislike that person at all. And if we don't dislike that one person, then there's maybe a chance that we were wrong about the group that that person belongs to, right? And so I think it's um, yes, the market provides, and we have such great examples of that, but also, this idea that often our preconceived prejudices or the idea that we have an enemy in a certain group of people, as soon as we get to know those people and are in proximity to them where we have conversations and we can laugh and we can enjoy something together, our differences really begin to fade. And so I think there's another really important lesson in here also about the dangers of collectivist thinking and grouping people based on race or religion or whatever the other identifier is, because we really miss out on opportunities to have a really good time and happy, peaceful relationships if we view the world that way.
I think that's a great thing to add. Thank you for that. And we will leave it at that, guys. And don't forget to like and subscribe to our podcast. And until next time, we will talk to you later.
Bye.
You've been listening to The Way the World Works. Make sure your family is subscribed and check out TuttleTwins.com for more awesome content.